There is a near-universal sigh of relief that accompanies the arrival of summer. It's a feeling woven into our very biology, a collective memory of ancestors who survived another winter. We anticipate the first truly warm day when the sunlight feels like a physical blanket on the skin, when the evenings stretch out lazy and golden, and the world seems to exhale after months of cold. Summer means growth, abundance, and a sense of freedom. It's a promise kept by the planet, a rhythm as reliable as the turning of the earth itself. But what if it wasn't? What if, one year, the gears of the season slipped and summer simply failed to arrive? Imagine a June that felt like a chilly, damp March. Imagine waking up in July not to the hum of insects, but to a chilling frost whitening the fields, killing the young shoots of corn and potatoes. Imagine reports of snow in August, not in the high mountains, but in the valleys and towns where people were desperately trying to coax a harvest from the soil. This isn't the plot of a science fiction novel. This was the lived reality for millions of people in the year 1816. It has been known by many names, each more grim than the last: the year without a summer, the poverty year, and, most bluntly, 1800 and froze to death. For those who endured it, the world seemed to have been plunged into a bewildering and terrifying new age. The sun was strangely dim, often appearing through a persistent dry fog or haze that gave its light a bizarre reddish tint. Sunspots, visible to the naked eye, were reported across continents. The cold was relentless, ruining crops, starving livestock, and pushing humanity to the brink of a global panic. The cause was not a global war, for the Napoleonic Wars had just ended. It was not the fulfillment of some dark prophecy or a supernatural curse. The truth was somehow both more terrestrial and more terrifying. It was an ECOA-delayed, global consequence of a single, cataclysmic event that had occurred a year earlier and half a world away. The story of 1816, the year summer was stolen, begins not with the whisper of a curse, but with the roar of a mountain. To understand the silent, creeping cold of 1816, we must travel back 1 year to April 1815, to the remote island of Sumbawa in what is now Indonesia. For centuries, Mount Tambora had stood as a majestic, dormant giant, a verdant peak rising over 14,000 feet into the sky. But for several years, it had been stirring. Minor tremors and small plumes of steam were harbingers of a catastrophic power building deep within the earth. On the evening of April 10th, that power was unleashed. The eruption of Mount Tambora was not just an explosion, it was a geological event of almost unimaginable scale. It registered a 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VEI, most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded human history. The sound was apocalyptic. The blasts were heard over 600 miles away, a distance so great that British officials in Sumatra at first mistook the noise for cannon fire and dispatched troops, believing a neighboring outpost was under attack. The eruption column, a churning mass of superheated gas, ash, and rock, rocketed an estimated 27 miles high, punching through the troposphere, the layer of the atmosphere where our weather happens, and into the serene, stable layer above it, the stratosphere. An estimated 36 cubic miles of material was blasted from the mountain, enough to bury the entire island of Manhattan under a layer of rock and ash 2 miles deep. The sheer energy released was equivalent to thousands of the atomic bombs that would be developed a century later. For the people of Sumbawa and the surrounding islands, the world ended. Darkness fell for days as the sky filled with ash. Pyroclastic fluorescent avalanches of gas and debris moving at hurricane speed scored the mountain slopes, annihilating every village, every plant, every living thing in their path. The collapse of the magma chamber triggered tsunamis that ravaged nearby coastlines. The thriving kingdom of Tambora, its people and its language, was utterly erased from existence. But the most profound impact of Tambora was not its immediate fiery destruction. It was the insidious, invisible payload it injected into the stratosphere. Among the trillions of tons of dust and rock was an enormous quantity of sulfur dioxide gas, up in the stratosphere, far above the cleansing influence of rain and clouds. This gas underwent a chemical transformation. It combined with water vapor to form tiny droplets of sulfuric acid or sulfate aerosols. These aerosols were too light to fall back to Earth quickly. Instead, they formed a vast gossamer-thin veil that was gradually spread around the entire globe by the high-altitude stratospheric winds. This veil was a planetary sunshield. It didn't block the sun entirely, but it reflected a critical percentage of incoming solar radiation back into space before it could warm the planet's surface. The Earth, deprived of its usual energy budget, began to cool. The world was about to learn a terrifying lesson in global atmospheric physics, delivered by a volcanic whisper that traveled thousands of miles from its thunderous source. As the stratospheric veil of sulfate aerosols spread from the tropics northward and southward during late 1815 and into 1816, its effects began to manifest in bizarre and devastating ways across the northern hemisphere. The climate, a system of immense but delicate balances, was thrown into chaos. What followed was not a simple uniform cooling, but a series of extreme and unpredictable weather events that defied the very concept of seasons. In North America, particularly in New England and eastern Canada, the year became a surreal nightmare for farmers. Spring arrived late and grudgingly. Then, on June 6th, a wave of Arctic air plunged south. Snow fell as far south as the Catskills in New York, and a heavy blanket covered Quebec City. The tender shoots of corn, beans, and squash that had just begun to grow were blackened by a killing frost. Farmers replanted, praying for a change, but the cold persisted. July brought more frost. A newspaper in Danville, Vermont, grimly reported, on the 17th and 18th, it was so cold that water froze an eighth of an inch thick, and on the 20th, there fell a small quantity of snow and hail. In Pennsylvania, rivers were reportedly still frozen in August. The growing season was effectively erased. The corn crop, a staple for both humans and livestock, was a near-total failure. Europe fared no better. The continent, already exhausted and impoverished by decades of the Napoleonic Wars, was plunged into a new kind of crisis. A persistent, low-pressure system parked itself over the continent, leading to a year of incessant, bone-chilling rain and storms. Rivers like the Rhine flooded their banks repeatedly, washing away what few crops had managed to sprout in the weak, filtered sunlight. In Switzerland, the misery was so profound that it felt biblical. Glaciers advanced and constant rain triggered landslides. The grain harvest failed for 3 consecutive years. Ireland suffered a catastrophic failure of its potato and oat crops, leading to a famine and a typhus epidemic that killed tens of thousands, a grim foreshadowing of the Great Famine that would follow 3 decades later. Across the world, the story was the same. In Asia, the Tambora event drastically disrupted the Indian summer monsoon. The change in temperature gradients between the land and sea altered the atmospheric circulation, first causing widespread drought and then triggering late torrential floods. This environmental instability had another, more sinister consequence. In the Bay of Bengal, the altered water conditions changes in salinity and temperature air, now believed to have caused a strain of the cholera bacterium to mutate into a far more virulent form. This new strain of cholera exploded out of Bengal, spreading along trade routes and pilgrimage trails, igniting the first of 7 global cholera pandemics that would kill millions of people over the next century. The societal fallout was immediate and brutal. Food prices skyrocketed. Desperate people ate cats, rats, and moss to survive. Food riots erupted in cities across Britain, France, and Germany as starving citizens broke into bakeries and granaries. The crisis triggered a massive wave of migration. Thousands of families in New England, their farms ruined and their futures bleak, packed their belongings into wagons and began the arduous journey west, seeking more fertile land and a more stable climate in the Ohio Valley and beyond. It was an exodus born not of ambition, but of desperation, a human tide pushed westward by a cold that had traveled halfway around the world. It is a testament to the resilience and creativity of the human spirit that even in the midst of such widespread despair, light can find a way to break through the darkness. The year without a summer was a period of immense suffering, yet paradoxically, it also became an unwitting catalyst for some of the most enduring works of art, literature, and innovation in modern history. The same atmospheric gloom that starved farmers inspired poets and pushed inventors to think in new ways. Perhaps the most famous cultural legacy of 1816 was born from boredom and bad weather. That summer, a group of English literary luminaries, including the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, his 18-year-old future wife Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, the scandalous Lord Byron, and his physician John Polidori were holidaying at the Villa Diodati by Lake Geneva in Switzerland. They had anticipated a blissful summer of boating and alpine hikes. Instead, they found themselves trapped indoors for days on end by the incessant rain and a wet, ungenial summer. To pass the gloomy evenings, lit by flickering candlelight as storms raged outside, Byron proposed a contest. They should each try their hand at writing a ghost story. The challenge sparked something profound. While the others eventually lost interest, Mary Godwin was haunted by a waking dream of a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together, a hideous phantasm of a man. From this vision, she began to write Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, a novel that would not only define the genre of science fiction, but also explore timeless questions of creation, responsibility, and what it means to be human. In the same house, during that same dreary summer, Polidori penned The Vampire, a short story that transformed the vampire from the brutish ghoul of folklore into the suave, aristocratic predator we recognize today, directly influencing Bram Stoker's Dracula decades later. The bleak, otherworldly atmosphere left its mark on other art forms as well. Lord Byron, watching the bright sun was extinguished, wrote his famous apocalyptic poem, Darkness, a chilling vision of a world plunged into an eternal winter. Across Europe, painters were captivated by the sunsets. The fine volcanic ash and sulfate aerosols lingering in the stratosphere scattered sunlight in a peculiar way, producing spectacularly vivid, intensely colored twilights of orange, red, and violet that had never been seen before. The English painter J.M.W. Turner, a master of light and atmosphere, is believed to have been heavily influenced by these volcanic sunsets, which are reflected in the fiery, dramatic skies of his later masterpieces. The crisis also spurred practical innovation. In Germany, the failure of the oat crop led to the mass starvation and slaughter of horses, the primary mode of transportation. This transportation crisis prompted a German inventor named Karl von Drais to search for an alternative. He designed a two-wheeled wooden contraption that a person could straddle and propel forward by pushing their feet against the ground. He called it the Lauf machine, or running machine. It was a strange-looking device, but it was the world's first steerable, human-propelled vehicle, the direct ancestor of the modern bicycle. A global catastrophe had, out of sheer necessity, given birth to a new form of personal freedom and mobility. The story of 1816 is more than just a historical curiosity. It is a profound and humbling lesson etched into the geological and cultural record of our planet. It is the story of a single, colossal breath from the Earth's interior that changed the course of human history. The eruption of Mount Tambora set in motion a devastating domino effect. A volcanic explosion in Indonesia led to a stratospheric veil, which caused a global cooling, which triggered crop failures, which resulted in famine, disease, mass migration, and social upheaval across the world. Yet, from that same dark, cold year came the birth of Frankenstein, the dawn of the vampire in literature, the invention of the bicycle, and a new, awe-inspiring palette for the world's greatest artists. The year without a summer serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of our civilization. We build our societies, our economies, and our lives upon the assumption of a stable, predictable climate. We take for granted the rhythm of the seasons, the warmth of the sun, and the reliability of the rains. But 1816 demonstrates that this stability is not guaranteed. A single powerful event, whether natural or, as we are learning today, man-made, can disrupt this delicate balance with breathtaking speed and global consequences. It reveals just how interconnected our world truly is. How a geological tremor on a remote island can cause a loaf of bread in Switzerland to become an unobtainable luxury and push a family in Vermont to seek a new life 1,000 miles away. This brings us to a crucial final reflection. What have we learned? The scientists of 1816 were baffled. They had no concept of the jet stream or stratospheric aerosols. They could only look to the heavens and wonder. Today, we understand the mechanisms that caused the crisis. We have satellites that can monitor volcanoes and climate models that can predict the potential fallout of a major eruption. But does this knowledge make us safer? In a world far more populous and interconnected than that of the 19th century, with global supply chains that depend on split-second timing, Are we better equipped to handle another Tambora event? Or are we in fact more vulnerable? The question hangs in the air, much like the volcanic dust of long ago. The story of the year summer was stolen is not just about the past. It is a warning and a guidepost for the future, urging us to appreciate the profound and delicate equilibrium of our planet and to recognize that the lessons of history are not written in stone, but in the very air we breathe.